I fall asleep under the trees. I follow where the current leads. Whispers in the woods, they call to me. Listen as the wind awakes the leaves.
Welcome to the Wellness Project Podcast. I am your host, Wilson. Each episode aims to bring mental health awareness through exploring psychoeducation, scholarly literature, professional interviews, and the personal stories of people's journey to mental wellness. So, with that said, let's get started.
I can feel the mountains come alive. It feels like my whole life I've been blind.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. And then, like, as you're saying this, it's making me kind of reflect on the idea that although I like to get deep with people, it's a skill set. It's I wouldn't say acting, but that's the first word that comes to mind. But it's like a flow that I can go through in my head to where I'm doing it professionally.
Yes, you're not. Yeah. So my wife, because she sees a therapist,
Mm-hmm.
and she always laughs about it because she really likes her therapist, but there's always that client patient where it's not her.
Mm.
So Tori's all real.
You're right. Yes.
But the therapist is not.
We
She shares lots
can't
of
be.
personal stuff.
Yeah.
But it's not real.
Yeah, it's not reciprocal in the
Yep.
conversation,
Mhm.
and I think that's what makes a good therapist is
Mhm.
being able to do that thing,
Yep.
because, there's so much training, not only in like the words that I would use with someone, but then also keeping those boundaries. I mean, that is the hardest part about our job as therapists is boundaries,
Yeah.
and it took me a long time to be like, like towards the end of my master's program, I was like, okay, professor, what do I do when my friend wants to talk to me or my wife wants to talk to me? I felt so stupid. Like,
yeah, no, that's a good question though.
yeah, because I'm like, how do I handle that? And then they said it very simply, like, well, you be a friend then, and you be a husband then,
Yeah.
so it
Turn it off.
turn it off, which is really hard to do, and I think probably doing these podcasts is another reason that this kind of came up for me, was to maybe have like another outlet for that skill set. So like the guests that I interview, which is another reason why I'm very hesitant about doing video, is I like the anonymous part of interviewing people. It's about the story is what these podcasts are kind of supposed to be about.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about your name or where you live. I definitely want people to have like a general sense of who you are. So I'd like for you to describe yourself in that way. But this was a good disclaimer of like, I'm not looking for your name and where you work exactly, but just kind of tell me a little bit about who you are.
All right. Well, I'm a small town kid. I suppose we're talking about where I'm at and living in Port Clinton because we're all local. So
Sure.
for the most part. But yeah, no, we moved here when I was like 8 years old, from Lime, Ohio. And, my parents bought into a family business. Basically, I was raised here. The long story short is then I went to Ohio State for college.
Oh, wow.
I always like to joke with everybody that I was either going to join the military or go to Ohio State because those the only things I was interested in was football or
Yeah.
possibly going and hurting someone. So I made it into Ohio State, so that's what I did.
Yeah.
And then had no idea what I was going to do with myself. And my parents were both in insurance, so I was an exploration major at Ohio State, which is just
Trying to figure it out.
Well, it's Ohio State's cool way to say undecided, that you have no idea what you're doing.
Yeah.
So
but you're still taking classes and stuff.
I am, but
Yeah.
it was like I took like Norse mythology and stuff, and because it sounded really cool.
Okay. So you got to do things that you were interested in.
Probably the hardest class I had, to be honest. That chick was tough.
What was it again?
Norse mythology.
Norse?
Norse, like,
Norse.
so like Odin, Thor,
Oh, okay.
all,
Okay.
all
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
stuff. Yeah. So I took a whole course on that. Yggdrasil, the tree. Yeah, I'm a real nerd.
You're into mythology and that.
I love all that stuff. History, huge
Yeah.
history fan, all that kinds of stuff. But then I had to pick what was my major going to be. So, I just basically walked into the business school and I was like, well, If you're not good at anything, you do business stuff, right?
Well, I mean, I've heard a lot of people with business degrees kind of spin it in that way, but for someone that has zero business skills, it's you definitely have a solid background, and you have your bachelor's. Okay, because like the bachelor's to me is the foundation for higher education. So you want to go broad. You don't want to specialize in your bachelor's program. So I mean, I give yourself some more credit. Plus, you went to the Ohio State University,
Yeah, buddy. But it was it ended up being super funny because I went in there and I'm talking to them and they're like, "Well, you have to pick a major before you come back," and which means I actually had to pick it before I left for the summer, and because I'd always come back and work here in the summer. And then I remember talking to my dad. I called him. I was like, "Yeah, I got to pick a major," and he's just kind of like,
Yeah, you do, kid.
It's taking you 2 years to figure that out. I don't have a lot of hope in you figuring this thing out. So, but it ended up being really funny because I just went in there and they were like, "Well, what do your parents do?" Because I didn't know what to do, and I was like, "Well, they're both in insurance," and they're like, "Well, we have a risk management insurance program." I'm like, "Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
Will that get me to graduate in 4 years?" And she's like, "Yeah, it will." And I'm like, "That's the one.
That's the one.
Let's do it."
Yeah.
So then it was cool for my dad because then I graduated and went to work for one of our insurance companies, and I walked into the same office that he did.
Yeah.
He graduated from college, whatever,
Sure.
20, 30 years before or something like that.
Okay, so your dad went to Ohio State too?
He didn't go to Ohio State.
Oh.
He went to Otterbein.
Okay. Yeah.
So he actually, well, that's not true. He got back in the day, he got dropped off at Ohio State with $5,000, which is a lot of money back then.
Sure.
And his dad was like, "Go get an education."
Holy
Didn't sign him up
crap.
for class. Didn't do anything. Didn't get him a room or anything like that. Just dropped him off. It's like, "Here's $5,000. Figure it out."
Oh my God. And he was 18
Yeah.
or so and
Yeah.
just dumped your kid off at school like that?
So it went exactly as well as you would have thought. My dad flunked out after like a quarter and a half.
Yeah.
And went and worked. He worked for a horse farm up in northern Michigan, where he went to summer camp. And then my mom got more serious, came back and
Okay.
went to Otterbein and went from there. And it was the same thing for me, where I was just basically floating through the first 2 years of college, met my wife.
Yeah.
My GPA went up like a ton. I actually read books.
Yeah. That's like my favorite age group to work with as a therapist is that 18 to 28-year-old range because, I mean, so far tried and true throughout history, it's just a shit show. Like it's difficult to navigate, particularly your identity, who you want to be. If you get a chance and you're in the Port Clinton, Ohio area, stop by the Yellow House Bakery, located on Madison Street in Port Clinton, Ohio. The Yellow House Bakery is passionate about a few things: simplicity, accessibility, community, family well-being, and, of course, baked goods. They aim to connect by creating good-for-the-soul baked goods using only high-quality, simple ingredients. And each month, they also offer a new, unique baked good. And trust me, they sell out quickly, so make sure you get there early. An adult job, they were engaged, they had a house, and they were 21 and were like feeling disordered, like they didn't have their life together. And I'm like looking at myself and I'm like, are you crazy? You're doing fine.
Yeah, and they feel that way because they are the person that can do that stuff. So, the person that feels like, well, I'm 21 and I work at Verizon 3 days a week. I got it all together. And it's like, well, no.
Yeah, no.
No, you don't. You're really far off the mark. Whereas that person's like, there's so much more I need to do.
Yeah.
And that's what drives them to be accomplished. So it really doesn't surprise me at all with that kind of person. But
Yeah.
That particular, man, it's like I walk into a high school and it's funny to reflect back on it now because, obviously I was that stupid, but it's like you between high school and college, it's like you gather all the stupidest people that you possibly can and put them in a building and then you expect it to work out okay. And it's incredible because just, you know, and I can look back and see a bunch of the stuff I did and how stupid I was about just how I spent my days, what I would talk about, what was important and things like that. So it's just amazing to go through that process.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what I would really love for all those kids to really understand is that it's okay.
Yeah. And they need to hear that,
Yeah.
you know, and from like a psychological point, I think the beauty in that time period is exactly what you just said of experimenting with conversation and getting your feelings hurting other people's feelings. I'm not saying obviously to a certain degree, but it's probably the first time that's ever happened, you know, or you were like offensive to someone in that you're kind of playing with life
Yeah.
for the first time,
Yeah.
you know? And it's fun to hear the stories. It's fun to kind of encourage people and then also kind of, you know, always go back to safety and be like, hey, you know, like the stuff you're doing, I don't think it's that safe. Or you probably should lock your door at night. I'm just saying,
Yeah.
you know, kind of a thing. But
It's certain precautions. Yeah, you know, like you know, don't drink beer out of the back of a pickup truck while it's driving and try and shoot signs as you're going past it.
right.
Never heard of that, but
Yeah.
you know, if you're the kind of person that would do that thing,
Just the risk in life, you know, and this will be funny with you doing insurance now is, you know, you want to take reasonable risks, but you have to take risks.
Yep.
You absolutely have to. If you play it, because that's kind of like the other sad side is someone that doesn't take any risk, you know, and it's like they wonder why they're not feeling well. It's like, well, you have to put yourself out there. You have to be a little bit vulnerable and say, is the payoff going to be worth this?
Yep.
You know, on both ends of it, win or lose.
Yeah, and in I mean, it really all that stuff starts at such a young age, and this is all. I reflect on this stuff so much more because, you know, so I got 5 kids, you know, 8 on down.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm right in the thick of all that stuff where it's like, I think about those things, like where my daughter, she goes to the pool and her friend's there.
Yeah.
But she didn't invite her friend and her friend's with another friend.
Uh-oh.
She doesn't hang out with a lot. And it's like, well, so she's just like milling around my wife and she's milling around me. And Tori's like, I can't get her to go over there. And I'm like, hold my beer, watch this.
Put her out there.
You get over there.
Yeah.
And you go and talk to him. And she's like,
What do I say?
anything.
Yeah.
It's your friend. Go
Right.
over, say hi to your friend, and then say, hey, I don't know your name. My name's Marissa.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you. And then go through and just, you know, hey, do you guys want to go swimming? Or are you guys like, you know, what's up? What are you guys doing? You know, can I hang out with you guys? You know, I mean, I guess that always sounds desperate from like an adult,
But it's not for a kid.
no, it's not for a kid.
Yeah.
Like, you know, where the kids, where they're like, you know, it's, if I'm like, hey, Mike, can I come over to your house? It's kind of weird. I mean, yeah.
But I'd say sure.
Well, yeah, sure, whatever.
Yeah.
But like when you're a kid, like that's what you do. You're like, I want to come over to your house and see your bedroom.
Yeah.
Like it's just, you know, all that stuff's it's just so cool how that works. Cause it's like, you know what? I'm going to come sleep over at your house in your bed with you.
Right.
And then the other kid's response is obviously, yes, that sounds fantastic.
Yeah.
You and I do that. It's not a good
yeah. As an adult, it's not going to work.
It's not cool.
But
It's bad if you're doing that past the age of like, I don't know what that is, maybe like 14.
I'd
you
say
should
14,
really
yeah.
consider that's a terrible decision, especially if it's somebody that you are sexually interested in. Do not just say, hey,
No.
we're going to come over. That's not a long-term, that's not a solid long-term plan.
But I think you're definitely onto something. It's probably hyper focused for you now, having 5 kids under the age of 8, of like how important it is to teach kids how to introduce themselves and how to model and role play conversation, because they just don't know how to do it. And that's normal. But it's like going back, like one of the things I always try to explain to parents is, when I'm working with parents, is you got to go back to your firsts. You know, go back to your first kiss, go back to your first breakup, go back to your first time spending the night at a friend's house and like what that was like. So you kind of have an idea of like maybe what they're going through too.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's certainly helpful. And you know, you got to learn, there's 2 of you, hopefully,
Mm-hmm.
in the relationship. And and that other person's got different experience and its perspectives too. So sometimes where it's like, if I can't remember that, it'd be like, well, what was that like for you?
Yeah.
And then that can be kind of cool too, because then you learn like what emotions and what kinds of stuff did you go through. Because my wife and I were complete opposites for that, where I didn't date anyone until I met my wife.
Mm-hmm.
And then my wife, my joke always is that she dated like 50 different guys, but she was kind of the one where it'd be like, hey, are we going out? And then they're going out. And then of course they want her to put out, and then no dice.
Right.
So then that broke up pretty quickly. So
Yeah.
she was getting through a lot of boyfriends because they were looking for a little more. She was giving up. She was not an easy girl. So, she probably hate me saying all that stuff, but
This is why we don't say your name.
yeah, there you go. But so it's just, and that's kind of cool from that standpoint, because it's just two very different perspectives. Like
Totally.
I didn't date or really, like, I had like crushes and all that kinds of stuff, but I didn't date or have any intimate relationship with anybody until my wife. So like, I was like, I would have been 20 years old when we met, and I was an emotional wreck.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I would like
Sure.
cry about stupid stuff, like somebody that doesn't cry about anything. And then I would just cry about stupid stuff, and we would get arguments over dumb things. And it's like super sensitive about her hanging out with other dudes and all that kinds of stuff, which is all normal things that I should have gone through in high school.
Right.
But didn't. So I got it all in like a crash course, and my poor wife had to put up with all that stuff. But
it's also because it was probably the first time someone meant something to you that wasn't your family.
Bingo.
And that, I mean, my God, to bring someone into that space is sure, and it's, I always tell younger clients too, like, if you think you learn a lot from your first love, you're going to learn a hell of a lot more from your first breakup.
Yeah. Well,
a lot more.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And, I guess, it's like the advice is like for kids that age, it's like you should be dating multiple people. You should not be having sex with multiple people.
Yeah, those are two different things. I would say it like courting, or that's like the old school word or whatever. And yeah, it's and having like a kinship with more than one friend. Like this whole best friend saga that happens with little kids. I'm like, get over that stuff, man. Just have lots of friends. I wouldn't even declare someone your best friend.
Yep. 100%. Yeah, my daughter does that, and and then it's always fun to watch them gauge the normalcy of themselves against you.
Mm-hmm.
So she does that, and she's like, well, who's your best friend?
Yeah, sorry, I'm way older, honey.
And I'm like, honey, I got a lot of really good friends. Like, where when I had my wedding, it's like I got to pick from a bunch of really good friends that I have. Do I have, I've got a best friend for this. I've got a best friend for this. My brother-in-law is one of my best friends. And, I work with one of my best friends. And I've got best friends that I haven't seen in 10 years that are still, I could meet with them today and it'd be like nothing happened. So it's like, you don't have, there are friends, varying degrees of friends in different situations. Don't put the pressure on yourself or the pressure on that other person.
Yeah, that's a good point too.
To be your best friend.
Yeah.
Because you might not be their best friend.
That's the worst when someone's picked to be their best friend and they don't want to be their best friend. I've been in that position before.
Yeah.
It's like, oh man.
But it's also like that's another great situation to find yourself, because then you understand, like, it's okay if I think you're my best friend and you think someone else is your best friend. That's totally fine.
It should be.
You just have to understand that dynamic and be like, okay, so that's the person I like to hang out with most, or I respect most, or I enjoy most, and things like that. But they might enjoy someone else more than me, which is fine.
Sure.
And that's where, like, going back to those teenagers, man.
Yeah.
And those young adults, like, sound like an old man. There you go for the podcast. I'm 35, so
well, that kind of puts us into like the range there.
I'm getting there and getting into old man territory. Get off my lawn, but it's that's the kinds of stuff where where it's like I can hang out with somebody and be like, he is awesome. I would love to be really good friends with him, and then try and hang out with him a few more times, and he's busy because he's got so many other friends, and it's like, that's fine, it's totally cool.
Sure.
And but when that's, I've had many experiences like that. I have a certain level of confidence that I've developed over time. Whereas with those, that's really what it is for teenagers and early 20s, is they haven't had the time
Correct.
to develop that confidence.
100%. And that's that beautiful time in that life. I think it's designed that way, and it's like, usually I would say around your 20s, it's really hard for your parents to quote shelter you anymore. Like if you haven't learned about drugs and sex and dangerous things by that age, it's kind of a disservice to you, and you're really, really vulnerable out there to a lot of bad stuff. But you also don't want to just throw it all at them at one time. It's got to brew, you got to kind of soak it in and stuff. But yeah,
Well, and like that's a great one where you're talking about like drugs and sex and alcohol and relationships and things like that. And you don't have to do all of those things to be aware of them. So it's an important thing for like kids to understand, well, I can't be cool, or I can't understand what it's like if I don't smoke pot. And it's like, yeah, you can.
Yeah.
Like, just find your stupid friend that does it and be like, oh, that's what he's like, alcohol.
You start basing it off of your surroundings, your environment.
100%. Alcohol, if you want a really great perspective on alcohol, it's like, I'm not going to tell kids to underage drink, but, if you have, that's one perspective. Go to the same party sober.
Right.
You want a shocking experience.
Yeah.
Look at what all those morons do that you're not doing because you're sober. So it's like all of a sudden when, dude's puking in the toilet and those two are getting in a fight and
stuff's getting broken.
She's trying to hook up with that guy when she's dating someone, he's dating someone else, and you're watching this whole thing like, what is happening? And it's like alcohol.
Yeah, it's not a good look.
That's what's happening.
I hope at some point in my soul's existence, I get to go back and like rewatch my life and like go back to some, for me, it was like high school parties, but to go back, as a 97-year-old soul and look back on myself at a,
you're braver than me.
It would have been, whoo.
I don't want to see that crap. That's terrible. Yeah. Some of the stuff that and it's like, and I always like those people, there's the people that are like, I don't have any regrets. Everything was a good learning experience and all that kinds of stuff. And I'm like, I get that perspective. I really do. Like people who have done a bunch of crazy stuff and all that. And, but I think it's really a disservice and probably a little bit dishonest. I mean, everybody has regrets. We all regret decisions that we make. I probably got, 3 or 4 sets of some really good life stories, but like one of them being that I was arrested twice.
Yeah.
When I was at Ohio State, and it's like,
let's save the details because I definitely want to come back on that one for sure.
But that's like a good one where, do I regret the decisions that led me to that? Yes. Do I regret the result in what I learned from those experiences? Absolutely not.
No.
Super valuable.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I just understand so much more for having gone through that.
Yep.
And then it also prepares me for, I don't know if I'm not in the same situation again, but, it prepares you for other situations where it's like, okay, if I find myself in a similar situation or something's going wrong and I'm around people going wrong, it's like, I know what the result of it's going to be.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, peace out. You guys have an awesome time.
Yeah.
Call me when the cops come and I'll bail you out. Sounds good.
Yeah. You will. I think, again, in that 20-year-old time frame, you start to really flex your boundaries. Some people push it way too far. Some people don't push it enough, but you hope to land in the sweet spot of kind of knowing how to gauge that. And I think too, the people that would say that they don't have any regrets, I would imagine that they just don't want to look at them. It's too hard to actually look at your life and be like, you know what? I actually fucked up. And man, I wouldn't take it back, but I learned so much from that horrible, horrible decision that I made.
Yeah. It's like drug addicts. I've got several buddies that are recovering drug addicts.
Yeah.
Like alcohol.
It's a lifelong thing.
They always try. It's good that they remind me of that. And I think that's always a good thing for everybody else to keep in mind.
Yep.
You're not recovered. It doesn't mean alcoholics is probably a better one because, drug addicts, you don't think about them being like, oh yeah, well now you can take a little hit because you got over it.
Right.
If you're a recovered addict, Or, same thing with, recovered alcoholic. Well, you're never recovered. You can't just be an alcoholic and be like, okay, well, I've been sober for 10 years. Now I can start having a couple beers. It's like, nope.
No,
it's who you are. And there's nothing wrong with you as a human being. We, and well, I mean, to be completely honest, it probably is. You're an alcoholic, and not everybody's an alcoholic. And it's like, so some people are like, well, great, there's something wrong with me and I suck because of it. And it's like, no, everybody sucks. Like, to some degree, we've all got those issues and problems. So if yours is being alcoholic, just be very thankful. I mean, other people,
at least
well, and other people's issues could be that they're a paraplegic.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, sorry you can't have a beer. That dude can't walk.
Sure.
Which one do you want to take?
Yeah. It's totally that boundary thing. For some people, it's like they have a really hard time with being in a committed relationship. It's like, well, maybe then you shouldn't hurt other people, and like put them through that kind of a thing. Or maybe it's gambling, or maybe it's shopping or something, or it's that delicious, pizza that you just can't stay away from. So, but that's that whole self journey thing that I just find as a therapist, it's the best gig. Being able to, but you have to be careful with those boundaries. I feel like that's the theme for the podcast. So, but learning those boundaries about yourself, that's an important journey. And it's something that you should take into a session and to talk to someone, potentially a professional that's not going to sway you like a friend or your mom or your wife would or something.
Ulterior motives,
But
that's I suppose as far as your boundaries thing too, that's because that's a really good point to think of that, because I mean, I don't know if you do this with people, but think of it as a physical boundary. Like, so if it's a physical boundary, how do you know where it is? Well, you see it.
Yeah.
How do you see it? Well, you got to go walk over and look at it.
Correct.
So it's the same kind of thing when you're talking about, so what boundaries should I have in a relationship? Walk over and look at it. So that girl that you think is really attractive, but you can't talk to her, it's like, well, you don't know what her boundaries are until you go over and find them out. So you can walk over and say, hey, you know.
Yeah, and it's even more blurred in this day of age because people have got some wacky boundaries.
Oh yeah, because everything comes from online, which is nobody's real life is online. Of course,
me working primarily with kids, it's amazing how often I come across a situation where I'm the first person that's ever said that to them or asked them that question. It's like, holy crap, I forget that, we all are gatekeepers to healthy adulthood. And if someone doesn't know, guess what? They don't know until you can bring it up to them.
Yeah, help them out. Yeah. And that's actually kind of tying back to like those younger ages and stuff like that, where some of you probably want some more like life experiences and stuff like that just to share.
Yeah.
One I really never thought was I don't know. I never really thought about it much until I was talking to a buddy of mine a few years ago. But I remember, so when I was younger, and my son's, this is great that I got a chance to reflect on it with a buddy of mine, and it's really nice because my son's very similar. Where I cry a lot. I would cry a lot when I was little, and he cries a lot. So, obviously we've got some pretty similar personalities there, and I would get so nervous when like my first day of school for like kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade, I would throw up.
Oh boy.
I'd throw up the night before. I'd throw up when the bus came. Like my mom remembers me, whatever it was, kindergarten or first grade, where like the bus pulled up. I ran inside, threw up, and then ran back outside. And my mom's like, "Can you be okay?" And I'm like, "Yeah, see you later, Mom." And I jumped on the bus. And I was always, I was not really socially awkward, but I just didn't have a lot of confidence in myself. And most kids are that way. Most kids just, you're not, confidence is something that you're born with for most of us. It's something you earn over time.
Yes.
And you get those weird kids that just, they think they're
they're
awesome the whole time, but it's, is it real risky or not? Yeah. Yes, exactly. And that's part of it too. They're risky. They try all that stuff. They've tried a bunch of different things. So they've probably earned it too. So it's really uncommon, very, very uncommon, like less than 1% of people are just born with a natural layer of confidence. And some of us acquire it more easily than others. But for me, it literally got to the point in middle school. It kind of centered around one experience I had where like this is, again, those weird things you remember vividly, but this was a big point for me. And this is so for any like kids or anything, listen to the podcast, like this stupid crap that you go through and you feel emotional about it.
Yeah.
And then you just brush it off like it doesn't mean anything. I mean, it means something. And
Sure.
It doesn't mean that you should spend all day dwelling on it and immediately call Mike and say, we need to
go
talk
see
about
somebody.
this immediately. But these things mean something. So I was in a classroom. It was like some weird, like between study hall period, one of those weird periods that they have in school. And there was pizza we were eating pizza. There's like, I don't know, 5 or 6 kids in there, not that many, and the teacher's in there, and we're supposed to be studying. Of course, none of us are, because that's what kids do, because you're wasting tons of time when you're not studying in studying hall, kids. But so we're in there, and there's like one of the parts of the pizza, and like one of the girls, and she's attractive, of course, which makes the whole thing worse. She like goes to get a piece of pizza, and she's like, it's too floppy. And of course, I'm like, that's okay. I like it floppy.
Yeah.
Well, what did I just say? I just said I like it floppy, right? So everybody laughs
God,
and makes
yeah.
fun of me
Mm-hmm.
for saying something so stupid, and then the hot chicks laugh.
They made the whole like reference
guys are
like
laughing.
about her and rather than the pizza.
Yes, exactly. So I like it floppy, and then
Yeah.
she's talking about how I'm floppy and all that kinds of stuff. So then, so I'm just embarrassed and all that kinds of stuff, and I literally like cried. And then, of course, there's a couple guys in there, and as soon as I start crying, what do? They
Start laughing.
Start laughing and making fun of me. And so one of those things is and again, I've got my own thoughts on a lot of stuff, so just take everything I say with a grain of salt, but good. I'm glad that they laughed at me, and and that's one of those things when people laugh at you, it hurts, and that pain makes you stronger.
Yeah.
Now it's like any pain. It
Right.
can make you stronger or it can break you. But the choice becomes yours, how you deal with that. And at that time, I had no idea how to deal with it. And so I literally went through a process. And this is more or less, it wasn't something I planned to do. It's just something I had gotten to that point where I went through a process and I was like, I'm not going to be that kid anymore. I'm not going to be the kid that cries. I'm not going to be the whiny, wimpy little kid that people make fun of and that whines and cries and are emotional and things like that. And I was like, I'm just not going to do it. And how am I going to do that? And so, whenever those situations would rise up, like you can feel it coming.
Right.
So I would fight it off.
Yeah.
Right?
You would kind of play with your reactions to that coming over you.
Bingo.
Yeah.
Until you finally hit on something that works.
Yeah.
So then you get in those situations where you start to get teary-eyed or something like that. And then
You can tap into that familiar road of being
Yes.
able to kind of hold back on that. But
Yep.
I mean, I love that. But I also think it's noteworthy to say that I have spoken to many, many men, and you may be one of 4 or 5 that have actually ever openly talked about men crying or boys crying, and that stupid stereotype, like it sucks that like that's the kind of childhood you were raised in, to where it was always being made fun of for crying in that way. But like, you're not anti-crying today, I would imagine, because you said that your son obviously is very similar to you. And it's like, I mean, you don't tell him to, suck it up every time. You probably do it occasionally because you know of that trauma.
Don't give me too much credit. So here, hold on.
I'm trying to help you.
I'm trying to help you. Don't. I'm not worth it. So that's the part of it too, where I come from the perspective in this is like anything else. You have to understand we're all different human beings. We all have different reactions. Most of us are going to get through it okay. So, if you don't agree with how I handle things, that's great. It's not the best way to handle it. I will tell you that right now. How I handle things is not the best way to handle it.
Yeah.
And, there's probably is a best way to handle it.
Well,
And nobody does it.
correct.
Jesus got it down, and I think everybody else is pretty much failing along the way. So, so what? Like my son and I had this conversation. So he was crying, and I was explaining to him, another thing that I think about a lot of times with parents, and it's like, and I'm not going to get on my high horse with parenting. My kids I'm not perfect, but one of the things that I try and keep in perspective is, as a parent, what is my goal? My goal is not to make him happy. My goal is not to give him a lot of money. My goal is to make him a man.
Mm-hmm.
That's my goal, and to have him be successful and fulfilled. Now, how he does that is up to him. I just have to give him that baseline so that he can handle life.
Yeah, you're an example of what it's like to be a man.
Yes. And so, which is important too as a parent. Like if your kids act terrible, maybe you should pay attention to how you're acting.
I would agree.
Because they're probably mirroring a lot of behavior from you. So your kids are spending hours on a phone. How many hours do you spend on a phone?
Yes.
If your kids aren't working hard, how hard are you working?
Yes.
If your kids are fat, how fat are you? And I know fat's not
well, but what you're saying is, like
if you don't control your diet,
and like
your kids won't control
the
your
food
diet.
that you're putting into your body, your kids are eating the same shit.
Exactly. So just because you get to pick when you have dessert now doesn't mean you should eat it all the time.
Yeah. Well, and that they're always watching you.
Yes.
They're always watching.
Always. Yes. And so we had the conversation. So what do I want? What is my goal for you? And it was to be a man. And he gets a great response, but I'm a boy. And I'm like, yeah, exactly, buddy.
Yeah.
I'm like, and that's what I'm trying to tell you. I'm getting you I will get you to being a man.
Wow, that's a beautiful conversation.
But it's gonna take a long time.
Yeah.
I'm like, how old are you? And he's like, 6.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, well, how old will you be when you're a man? And he's like, 18. And I'm like, what? If you're on the fast end of things, probably like 25 to 30.
Yeah, I would agree.
To be a fully are we even fully functioning at this point?
Well, I don't know if it was similar for you, but like for me, someone told me I was a man. Like it wasn't some internal experience that I had. It was almost like someone recognized me as like you're a man, and I'm like, no. And I'm like, oh, wait a minute. Yeah, I am.
Maybe I am.
Yeah, maybe. And it was like, again, coming from someone else. Right. And it kind of clicked. It was like, yeah, dude, like, someone else had to kind of call me out on that. And it's like, interesting, because when is that rite of passage?
Different for everybody.
Totally.
And that's what you got to understand too. So we had that nice conversation with him, then going back to the crying comments. And then I go back and he asked, well, is it okay to cry? And I'm like, in certain situations.
Yeah.
So, so the other part, which we can go into too, is I lost a son. So he was 16 months old when he passed away. And so I explained to him, I'm like, so if you lose a human being that is close to you, there is no better time to cry.
Yeah.
But it's the same thing where it also has to come to an end at some point. Where you got to stop crying about it. So, can I watch a Disney movie? And the first year afterwards, I could watch any Disney movie. Didn't you have to have anything to do with anything sensitive? I'd watch Aladdin and just start crying. I don't know, whatever it is, probably just associating it with kids and things like that. But particularly if I watched anything that had to do with brothers or sons or something like that, I would start tearing up. I'm sitting there and my kids are having an awesome time dancing around, watching the movie, and dad's sitting over the corner tearing up and crying about it. And so it's one of those things where but as time goes on, it's really not acceptable for me at this point to be crying about my son that passed away. So he passed away in 2020. Nothing related to COVID, but he passed away in 2020. And so now is it, and I guess that's different. Is it acceptable for me to cry about him? Yes. But not to go blubbering about him, and there's a dynamic there. And so it's the same thing. So I'm like, okay, so if he's like, well, what if the dog dies? I'm like, that's okay. That's sad. That's a sad moment, things like that. And he's like, well, what if I stub my toe? And I'm like, ooh, I'm going to have to give a hard pass on that one. I don't think stubbing your toe is a good thing to cry about. Now, is it okay if you cry? Yes, because you're 6 years old. If I stub my toe, and I'm 35 years old and I cry, do you think that's good? And he's like, no. I'm like, would you expect me to cry? The 6-year-old
said that to you. Yeah.
He's
It's a great conversation.
Yeah. So it's like, do I have all the answers on when it's acceptable to cry? Am I the authority on when a man can cry? Absolutely not.
No.
But the idea being that there are situations for it.
Well, you like what I hear you, or like what I hear what you've done is you've opened the conversation to your son,
Yep.
which is very, very special. And I would almost dare I say rare to have had a conversation from a father and a son to talk about crying.
Yeah.
And like not necessarily the appropriateness of it, but like just to open the door to it that's what I'm giving you credit for, and like there needs to be more of a conversation about crying. It's one of the podcasts that I'm waiting to sort out. You're probably going to be my guest on that just because I think it's interesting because you said it's probably not okay for you to cry now over your son's or from you losing your son. But I would say, yes, I would agree with you to a level of crying. Like
Yes.
you can't go to work every day, teared up,
That's what I'm talking
sulking,
about.
crying. Right.
Yep.
But
Or when when somebody brings up my
Yeah.
kids.
Yeah.
If every time they bring up my kids, because I say I have 5, 4 are alive, one's in heaven.
mm-hmm.
And so if somebody comes up and every time, because what does everybody ask?
Yeah, that's
How
what you
many
don't
kids
want.
you got?
Yeah.
And so it's like, what am I going to do? Start crying every time somebody
No.
does that?
No.
It's when he initially passed away, because he passed away January 4th, 2020.
Mm-hmm.
I was a wreck for about 2 weeks, which, it is what it is. Everybody grieves in their own time. Should it have been shorter? Maybe. Could I have taken longer? Maybe. But that's what it was. My wife was drove her nuts. I think it was a week later I went back to work.
Mm-hmm.
And she was not having that. She was not excited about that. But we've all got our different processes, and that's another thing too. When something really big like that happens, it's extremely difficult. But you do have to get back to normalcy.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a really nice conversation with a customer and friend of mine. And I told him about it because I knew that his son had passed. His son was, I think, 2.5 when he passed. And he explained it to me, and he says, look, you just lost a part of you. You will never be whole again, and there's nothing that can change that. You'll never be okay, but you can be 99%.
Yeah.
And it is your damn job to go be 99% for your family.
Yeah. And it's a good way of kind of honoring both sides to it, because, it to me, even like you're going to be triggered at different points in your life. It's going to come out of nowhere. So I guess like that's where I'm like,
Oh, it does.
yeah, it's okay to cry, but it could be the weirdest thing that'll kind of reignite that feeling in you. But you've been practicing that feeling since that pizza situation happened,
Exactly.
and
So-
you're like, you really know it,
Yes,
exactly. And you're okay with it.
Yeah, and so I guess that's where I try and when my son gets emotional and I try and talk to him about it, and my daughter, I've got 8, 6, 2, and newborn. My son Clyde is the gap there.
Okay.
So he would be 5 years old. He passed away when he was 16 months old.
16 months. Yeah.
And so when I talk to him about his emotions and controlling them, I'm like, well, it's not reasonable for you to have control over your emotions at this point. You don't even know emotions that you're going to have or what's going to set your emotions off.
Mm-hmm.
So what you have to do is you have to start trying different things. So it's like when he gets really upset, like I teach him, breathe in through your nose. My dad used to do this with me, which is where I got it from. Breathe in through your nose, out through your mouth, count to 10. And do that 10 times.
Yep.
And it's just that, there's the physiology of you're bringing more oxygen to your brain, which helps it function better. You're slowing down your breathing so that so you can stop doing that.
You're gaining control of this runaway train of emotion.
Control your body.
Yeah.
And then you can control your mind.
Yes.
So that's kind of what it is. Where and then you just have to understand. Okay, so what things trigger it? Should I avoid them, or do I just need to be prepared for them? Because if they're unavoidable, then they're unavoidable. You're gonna have to deal with it.
Yeah.
And so then eventually you get to the point where you can control them. You can control those situations, and even when you feel them coming, you can either deal with them or you can remove yourself from the situation because it's going to be a problem. So and it's that for me, so for anybody who's got little kids and stuff like that cry a lot, you know, you probably did. So keep that in mind. But the other thing too is you're emotional. So the other thing that I always struggled with was anger.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know that you get the two flip sides of the coin. If you get sad really easily, you're probably gonna get angry pretty easily too.
Yeah. Well, it's because, clearly, like the therapist hat's going to come on here. It's expanding that bandwidth of those feelings. I mean, you can be so angry that you cry. And you could
100%.
cry into anger.
Yeah, because you get mad about crying.
Yeah, because you get mad. So it's like it's teaching and learning and exploring kind of all those ways that you feel about certain things. And like what you said, it's different for all of us, but that's what makes it beautiful is that feeling wheel. You're kind of spinning it around and be like, you know what, today I'm feeling delighted, or today I'm feeling optimistic, or today I'm feeling joyful. I'm saying that because the sign's right in front of your head. So it makes it easy for me.
I'm feeling live on air.
There you go with the sign. So.
But yeah, no, it's and going back to boundaries is so to have that bandwidth, it's kind of like you want to have a wide bandwidth, a wide range of emotions, because that's what makes us human.
Yep.
The difference, like we get AI and stuff like that now.
They'll never be able to catch up.
They'll never be able to. Never's a strong term. I find it extremely unlikely that they'll ever be able to replicate human emotions.
That was my epiphany, and this happened recently. Of AI will always wonder what it's like to be a human.
Yes,
always, people. It's impossible.
Yep.
They can make it pretty damn close, just like they can with these phones and technology and all that. But when we're sitting and going on our first date at the digital McDonald's with our AI girlfriends and boyfriends, they're going to wonder, well, what's it like to be a human?
Yeah. What do you feel like? Because it's literally something, and I think even if you got them plugged in, because we're just one of the most amazing things is to remember that we're just electrical impulses.
Yeah.
That's it. Your heart, your brain, that's a different topic, but literally I have a, what are they called? Preventricular contractions.
Okay.
So I got those within months after my son passed. So literally him passing, which is amazing, broke my heart.
Yeah.
Physically. So the amount of the emotional toll that it took on my body literally broke my heart. You cannot tell me that those two aren't related. So the stress it put on my body. So preventricular contraction is when the chambers in your heart, they all are pumped by electrical signals that come from your brain. And so every once in a while, less than 1% of the time for me, so it's a really minor thing that nobody even worries about. You don't have to have it treated, nothing.
But it's significant to note.
Yeah, when you start having them, it freaks you out. I thought I was having panic attacks or heart attacks or something like that. I went to the hospital for it, and it's basically a misfire. So that electrical impulse is firing incorrectly, less than 1% of the time, and so. That's the amazing thing with the human body is we are electrical impulses. So theoretically, a computer can program right in there and understand those electrical impulses. But I just don't think it. I find it. I can't imagine how it could ever map it out to the point where it could feel the same thing. I think it could understand what's causing it.
Yeah, and it could mirror it, but it's mirroring us.
Could replicate it. Yes.
We're the real thing here.
Exactly. So it can learn your emotions and replicate them, but it's not. It could never have its own emotions.
Yeah, and you raised a good point because before you came in, I was just trying to look up some articles and just kind of be familiar with this topic of losing your son, and the one thing that stood out to me too was losing a child is the most stressful thing of any other experience that a human can experience. And there isn't a lot of good literature out there because it's such a hard topic. I mean,
maybe I need to write a book.
Well, dude, I mean, it's your story, and telling it just like you are today. And then the fact that if your wife or your husband dies, you're known as a widow. But when your child dies, there is not a word to describe it.
Yeah.
It's just not how it's supposed to be. So,
Painful. Yeah. Well, and it's really interesting from that standpoint too, because we all hear or know or learn about death, but in modern society, I mean, we don't take the time to think about it. And again, this history nerd in me about how safe our world is. Like we hear about
Today,
violence in
yeah.
Chicago, or genocide in Africa, or the Uyghurs in China.
mhm.
And while those are all terrible things, the amount of death that we experience today, which is honestly most largely from disease, the
Mhm.
vaccinations and
Cancers and things like that.
yeah, and medical treatments, antibiotics, all that stuff has dropped the deaths from disease down so much that it's incredible that we experience it not to the same amount that it used to be. So like I remember, one of those interesting things I read again, emphasizing my nerdiness here. I was reading a passage in Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, like Stoic philosophy.
Yeah.
It's very for anybody who feels like I felt,
Uh-huh.
where you feel like you're too emotional. Go read some of the ancient Greek and the Roman philosophers basically just copied the Greek ones. So go look at a lot of the Greek philosophy
Yeah.
on that. Marcus Aurelius does a really good job of just kind of summarizing a lot of those thoughts. There's a lot more Roman writing that survived, but there's a lot of really good philosophy there. And so he literally goes through in a passage and describes his friend's son dies.
Mm.
And so he describes how he basically, how terrible it was. It's
Yeah.
one of the worst things that can happen. And that, but you shouldn't take too long grieving about it. Like, let's not be obnoxious here. So it was a really fascinating passage where he is setting forth that idea that, so this is a guy who believes heavily in Stoic philosophy that says, it's okay to cry,
Right.
but there's a time.
Yes.
There's a time and a place for it. So there's a grieving process. And this guy went beyond the grieving process. And so he saw it as unacceptable and unmanly, and that this guy needed to rein it in.
Mm.
And so it was just fascinating from that standpoint, from a number of standpoints where you're looking at that, like, well, that happened to me. So,
Yeah.
it
It always goes back to like the cliche of, like men don't cry, which is like a horrible message and just passes it over.
yeah.
To where like at least people now I think are being much more, dare I say, sensitive to letting it out, because with you being, for you being someone that identifies as a crier, and hopefully you don't take offense to that, it's so, to me, like when I cry, dude, I feel 1,000 times better. Like I feel like it's lifted off my shoulder, and I'm someone that admits, because I don't have a therapist and I am a therapist, that I use crying as my therapy. And I do it at night. I usually listen to sad, sappy music or, some kind of songs, and I reflect on my day, and I usually cry for about 5 minutes to maybe one shed of a tear, and it's therapeutic to me. I do it probably 4 nights a week.
Yeah. See,
And that's okay.
yeah. And
You know what I mean?
and that's what I'm talking about. So like for me, and to be completely honest, I would define myself as someone who used to cry a lot.
Yeah.
I hardly ever cry anymore.
Sure.
But what the nice thing with that is you have found an acceptable outlet for it, because like the thing is, like, you can't crying's a good one, because it's like, if you have to be, particularly with your family and things like that, like you go by yourself,
Yep.
get yourself in a right mood.
Yep.
You cry, you come out of it, you're good to go.
Yes.
What a professional and adult way to handle that emotion.
Right.
Whereas the problem is when you get someone who just breaks down and starts crying in front of the whole family and the kids, and it's
Kind of brings the mood down.
yeah, well, now everybody
Yeah.
feels bad,
Right.
Not just you,
Right.
and it's showing them that that's a way to behave. And so, now just because it happens doesn't mean that you're a bad person. I mean, sometimes you just can't hold it in.
Oh yeah.
And you know
totally.
what? Somebody like my wife, she can't escape. Like she's a stay-at-home mom with the kids, and there's 4 of them. Like we laugh about it. We got a 2,600 square foot house, and at any given time, they're within 10 feet of her. Like it doesn't matter where she is. She goes to the bathroom. There's 4 kids in there.
Right.
It's incredible.
The door.
Yeah. If she shuts the door, they're just they sit outside and play and yell at her through the door. When are you done, Mom?
Oh, your poor wife.
Yeah, so she never gets a break. So like for her, it's just like she literally can't avoid it. So if she's gonna cry, it's gonna happen. But even then, she tries to go somewhere else because she understands that. And so I think that's the idea, because it's people are watching you. And so for me, I try to be the rock for the family.
I could sense that, of course.
So that's my role.
That's your role.
That's what I believe my role is as dad. So like when the tornado, the siren's going off, my daughter is losing her ever-loving mind.
Yeah,
Like,
so
we're
have
all
to
gonna die.
Perfect example. Yeah. So you have to be the strong, confident, brave dad.
Yep.
And if you start losing it and freaking out too, your whole family's going to fall apart.
Yeah.
You know?
So I'm out there standing in the middle of the garage, watching it all come in.
Yeah.
And all that kinds of stuff. And my daughter's like, you need to come down here. And I'm like, I'm going to be just fine. I can literally see the tornado coming. You know, and I'm explaining this stuff to her, and it's like, you know, so for everybody listening, just go get in the shelter. But I'm trying to demonstrate to her.
It's a good example.
A calm.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, I also can look at the radar and listen to everything and get a general idea of where this thing is.
Yeah.
And I have a better understanding of that than she does. So basically I stood up there for like 15, 20 minutes until the point where they said, yep, it's just east of Port Clinton.
Yep.
And I'm like, okay. So then I shut the garage door and I come downstairs and I just sit down there and I'm like, let's play a game.
There you go. Keep them calm.
Yeah, and that kinds of stuff. So we have the radios going, or we've got, like, you know, of course it's all on your phone now, but we're like listening to the forecast and stuff like that. And I'm describing the whole thing. And then like 15, 20 minutes pass by and they're like, okay, well, is the tornado gone? I'm like, the tornado's been gone for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Let's get out of the crawl space.
Right.
We don't have a basement. We don't have a crawl space.
Yeah.
The dogs are down there and everything. My dog,
but
yes,
you know, so like to wrap it up, you know, like as a man and as a father, you know, you identify as sort of setting the pace and teaching your kids how to emotionally develop. You know, and that's awesome, because it is important.
And that's what I think for me is going back to that middle school moment and all that stuff is it's think about what you want to be, what you want other people to think about you, and then act like it.
Yeah.
And I think what that is a lot of, you know, it kind of sounds like the fake it till you make it, but it's not. What you're doing is you're not faking it till you make it. You're teaching yourself to behave in a certain manner. So if stuff goes wrong and you can feel the adrenaline rising and you can feel yourself starting to lose your cool, just practice. You know, even if you can only make it 10 seconds before you got to bolt off, try and make it 11.
Yeah.
You know, and when don't bolt off, walk away, you know? And so there's those different situations that you can utilize to how would you want to behave in these situations? And it'll make you extremely uncomfortable, which is how you grow.
It is.
You're grabbing that boundary that you have and you're pushing it and you're pushing it and you're pushing it so that you can find out
how much you can handle.
How much can I handle?
You know,
and even then you can continue to handle more and more. So, you know, for me, that's how it worked. Is I had a vision of what a man would be like, what I would like to be as a man, and I'm not there, and I never will be. But it's always something that I can strive to be, and so for anybody out there that is looking for, you know, you're just not the person you want to be, start acting like the person you want to be, and soon you will be.
Beautifully said, buddy. Thanks.
No problem.
Hold each other close, walking in the rain. You were like a picture and not a frame. You were like the air and I a plane.
By the way, at The Wellness Project, we have merchandise. That's right, all mental health awareness themed products. We've got artwork, we've got shirts, we've got hats, we've got candles. We're gonna have one for like anxiety awareness, depression awareness, wellness awareness, which is actually out right now. That's right, you can get your own wellness awareness candle. What does it smell like, right? You have to come in and check it out. But if you hit me up on Facebook, or you can email me and I can give you that information. And thank you for your support.
There's a million places I could go, but so you